Greetings, knowledge seekers. Today I bring you a new segment where we'll discuss a story in which, during humanity's first attempt to colonize Mars, astronauts discover the true past of humankind. The story begins in 1967. After completing its mission and landing on Earth, the Soviet spacecraft Soyuz 1, with cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov on board, ends in tragedy. Many years later, under the leadership of Swedish billionaire William Mayer, an expedition to Mars is being prepared. After 10 months, the crew of the spacecraft Ulysses arrives at the Red Planet. The captain informs the team that they've received permission to land and asks the ship's artificial intelligence, named Irene, to verify everything necessary for a smooth landing. At this moment, Mayer reveals that he spent 4 years preparing for this trip, sacrificing almost all of his money. However, the American company Tselian beat them to it, landing 2 weeks ago. The problem is that Earth hasn't received any news from the American crew, except for a video in which they ask others not to come to Mars. A dispute arises among the crew members, but the captain declares that the landing will proceed anyway, and people disperse to their cabins. With 30 minutes left until landing, the AI Irene begins preparations. However, an unexpected issue occurs. The ship doesn't detach from the transport system, posing a threat to the entire crew. The only solution is to perform the separation manually. The commander ventures into space and struggles to release the attachments, but at that moment the shuttle enters Mars' atmosphere, throwing the captain into space. The shuttle nearly crashes into Mars because a system error causes a power outage. They can only rely on the AI for manual landing. Irene enters suspension mode, and the astronauts still manage to land on Mars. They made it, but their fuel is depleted and Irene won't restart. Without the onboard computer and life support system, they only have 1 day to survive. Alexandra mourns her late husband when she sees a distant figure through the window. After diagnosing the ship, it becomes clear that too much fuel was consumed during landing, and now the ship can't return to orbit. The only option is to wait for the solar panels to power up and feed the generators. But there's a storm on the surface, and it will take 2 days, time they don't have. At this point, Simon mentions the American ship Z1 that beat them by 2 weeks. It probably crashed, but there might be batteries left in the rover sets. He embarks on a journey while those remaining on the ship try to restart the system. Engineer Basil remembers that the AI has an energy-saving function. They attempt a restart, but Irene doesn't boot up. At that moment, the rover finds the remains of the American spacecraft and a surviving solar panel, but there are no signs of the American crew. The astronauts return but see an unconscious person in a spacesuit. Despite their ship running out of oxygen, Han insists on transporting the person. Nearby, they find the black box of the American spacecraft. The team reaches the ship, but Jay refuses to let them in, stating that 4 survivors are better than 8 corpses, so he won't open the doors. Alexandra tries to persuade the man when the discovered astronaut wakes up. At that moment, the AI Irene activates and opens the ship. Upon examining the doors, the found astronaut knows nothing about the American crew, as he is Vladimir Komarov, a Soviet cosmonaut born in 1927 in Moscow who was following USSR government orders. He doesn't know how he ended up there but isn't willing to reveal any secrets. Komarov confidently answers questions consistent with his era, which raises suspicion that he might have post-traumatic stress disorder. The astronauts send a message to Earth and receive a response from the American corporation Tselian, stating that there were no Russians on their mission. The Ulysses spacecraft crew tries to make sense of the situation. How could Komarov, who died in 1967, end up on Mars after all these years? Is he a time traveler or an alien? The psychologist is tasked with interrogating Komarov first, and he confesses that he's hungry. Han goes to get food while the others try to understand what really happened. Basil suggests the idea that Komarov was waiting for them. As Komarov eats the food Han brought, the woman confesses that he died years ago and his family buried him long ago. Poor Komarov takes this news rather calmly. Meanwhile, returning to the ship's status, although it has achieved stability, it remains unreliable because the engines don't work and there's no fuel, so departure is impossible. The crew continues to monitor Komarov, but he behaves calmly until he suddenly disappears. Simon searches the ship but finds nothing. That's when he discovers his spacesuit is missing. Part of the crew follows the heat trail tracked by Irene. The group led by Simon exits the rover and continues on foot when Alexandra reports that Komarov's DNA analysis showed the presence of a third strand. They realize he's not human and then catch up to Komarov, who leads them to an unknown structure with a small stone pyramid and tells Han that Mars has been waiting for them for a long time. At the same time, Goldstein, the founder of the Sand Corporation whose ship was the first to reach Mars, is informed about the discovery of a person on the Red Planet who couldn't have arrived there naturally, suggesting they were created on site. However, only artificial intelligence could survive for so long on a planet hostile to humans. This implies the need for further studies. Meanwhile, Komarov can't explain how he opened the door and found himself where they discovered him. The AI Irene analyzes the structure and determines that it's identical to Earth structures from ancient civilizations. This means that someone was inspired by human civilization or humans borrowed these elements from aliens. The ship's crew reflects more and more on whether they'll be able to return home when they notice Goldstein's second probe landing. Soon the ship's captain, Gemma, establishes contact and promises to help them return to Earth. However, Meyer doesn't trust Goldstein and advises hiding Komarov from the competitors. Han brings Komarov a uniform so he won't stand out when the visitors arrive and asks him to trust them. Shortly after, two armed military officers, Edward and Adam, arrive at their ship and behave quite aggressively. Edward demands they hand over the black box from the Z-1 ship and, not hearing their agreement, orders his companion to search the ship. However, Meyer hands over the found black box and they leave. Meanwhile, the chemist named Eva reports that the stone found on Mars consists of an alloy that doesn't exist on Earth. However, it's known from ancient sources where it might have existed and was once called orichalcum, the metal of Atlantis. In addition to copper, zinc, nickel, and iron, it contains a third strand of DNA similar to Komarov's. Meyer warns that if Goldstein finds out about this, he'll take the ship back. The crew is divided between those willing to trade Komarov for fuel and those willing to stay but want to know the truth. Han invites Komarov into her cabin and asks permission to use hypnosis. He agrees, and the psychologist begins her work. The rest of the crew listens to the conversation through a transmission. However, Komarov only shares the final moments on the Soyuz spacecraft before his disappearance. During this time, Gemma and Alan arrive at the ship and apologize for the military officer's actions, expressing their willingness to help solve all the failures. Han remembers her conversation with Komarov, who laments Earth's future due to humanity's irresponsible behavior. Meanwhile, it's revealed that billionaire Meyer didn't plan to fly to the planet just for the adventure of the unknown. 4 years ago, the rover sent a photo to Earth of a metal found, and he confesses that they found a stone with unknown DNA. Gemma explains that it's an information storage system that can be rewritten. Upon hearing these words, the AI Irene activates and deciphers the message in the stone. It's a series of numbers. At that very moment, Lieutenant J leads a mutiny. He doesn't trust Meyer, who warned them about San, but now the Americans have come to their aid. Their leader, as it turns out he concealed the true purpose of the flight, is ready to switch sides with Goldstein, who is willing to do whatever is necessary to combat his terminal illness. Later, Engineer Basil informs Meyer that Komarov has the same type of programmed DNA as the stone they found, but the most important revelation is that he deciphered a copy of Z-1's black box which shows that the oxygen in the ship was cut off at the moment one of the Americans hit Komarov. This means he was there and also activated the AI Irene when he boarded their ship. After the conversation, Meyer shows Han the photos they received from Mars 4 years ago, which, when deciphered, revealed Han's face. That's why he brought her on the expedition. The woman is disappointed. Meyer had a plan for everything. Suddenly, Han finds herself in her father's house where Komarov kindly tells her that she is the link between Mars and Earth. He has been waiting for her for thousands of years and will now prepare her to make a difficult decision. He provides her with coordinates on Mars where she should go. Meanwhile, on Earth, scientists inform Goldstein that Komarov is the equivalent of a computer and is himself a biological machine. They're ready to transfer his brain to Komarov's body, but they can't guarantee the preservation of his personality. However, Goldstein is willing to take any risk to get rid of his terminal illness. As Han leaves the ship despite Simon's protests, technicians Alan and Alexandra test the engine and discover that access to it is blocked. The AI Irene suddenly starts responding with jokes, which is completely unusual for a machine. It's revealed that she has reprogrammed herself. Now her interface and logic are changing, and she refuses to answer who or what made her do this. Engineer Basil realizes that her system is becoming like a brain. The AI Irene confesses that meanwhile, she is evolving. Han finds a small stone pyramid, and Simon forces Gemma to accompany him in search of Han. Jan discovers her absence and after contacting Simon receives orders not to let anyone in. Just at that moment, American military personnel arrive demanding they hand over Komarov. Jan is willing to open the entrance, but the rest of the team opposes. The captain asks Basil to send a message to Goldstein, hoping he might be more reasonable than his people. However, Irene has blocked communication with Earth. The engineer realizes that drastic measures will have to be taken, but Jan still opens the doors and the military personnel enter. Basil begins to restart Irene when the Americans find Komarov, but then the lights go out and the astronaut disappears. Meanwhile, Han falls stumbling down a hill and regains consciousness, but discovers that her leg is trapped between rocks and she can't free herself. At that moment, the enraged military officer demands that the crew explain where Komarov went. He starts hitting people, demanding to summon the captain. Han, desperate, screams believing it's her fate to die in a pit on Mars, but she is found by Simon and Gemma. Alexandra notices that a storm is approaching. The military officer prepares to abandon the Ulysses ship, leaving people in danger. Suddenly, the lights start flickering and the newly appeared Komarov asks to be taken back to Earth. Simon, Gemma, and Han go together to the place indicated by Komarov and find an entrance to an underground bunker very similar to an architectural piece on Earth. The psychologist senses where to go and guides the couple. Soon they find water, but this is not what Komarov wanted to show them. Meanwhile, on Earth, Goldstein tells the nurse a story about a study of Mars. Apparently, people were looking for green men, but it's all much simpler. He tells the story of the loyal dog Hachiko and compares Komarov to him, who was created by someone 100,000 years ago and abandoned on Mars, where he faithfully waited for his owner to be there on the agreed day and time. Back on Mars, the astronauts find a wall made of human bones and realize they are not the first humans on this planet. It's not Earthlings who colonized Mars, it's Martians who came to Earth after depleting the red planet's resources. A tragedy unfolds on the Ulysses ship. The cowardly Jan grabs a weapon intending to board the American ship at any cost to return to Earth and shoots Komarov. Han immediately falls and suffers unbearable pain. Gemma flees. Alexandra tries to help Komarov and Simon helps Han, but Komarov dies and Han also stops breathing. Then Simon takes off his helmet and, surprised by the presence of air in the cave, performs artificial respiration on his companion, which revives her. Gemma walks towards the Ulysses ship when she is informed about Komarov's death and the approaching storm, while Meyer secretly goes in search of his crew members because the Americans refused to take the billionaires' team back to Earth. At this moment, the recovering Han sees the light in the bunker and leads Simon towards it. Upon exiting, the astronauts see a figure in a spacesuit in front of them and recognize Komarov. Meyer finds the entrance to the bunker and catches up to Han as she heads towards the light. He is surprised by the presence of a living Komarov, who suddenly tells them that everything ended here long ago. The astronauts realize they are standing at Mars' North Pole, but wonder how they got there. Komarov explains that this planet was once inhabited by a species that went extinct because it lost its way, and that species was humans. A group of survivors settled in this place, but ended up killing each other when resources ran out. The rest flew back to Earth. Plato called them the Atlanteans. Komarov continues talking about how he waited for thousands of years for Han, who embodies qualities of both human and Martian branches. Only she can save humanity from itself and must decide if humans deserve a second chance. Their conversation is interrupted by a military officer who intends to take the psychologist back to Earth. The American points his weapon at the cosmonauts and Han seeks help from Komarov. Suddenly, the military officer starts gasping and falls. Upon returning to the ship, Simon orders them to prepare for departure, while Gemma from the sand ship tries to contact her associates, but none respond. She decides to fly back to Earth alone. The Ulysses crew heads to their ship trying to establish contact with her, informing her about the deaths of the military personnel, but she doesn't respond. That's when Meyer starts talking, recalling their past relationship and confesses that he's no better than Goldstein because he's willing to do anything to ensure his name remains in history, even betraying his team. However, she's not like that. She couldn't live knowing she had ruined people on an empty planet. Suddenly Gemma's voice is heard asking them to hurry. Goldstein has heard that Gemma has decided to take the Ulysses crew back to Earth and has blocked the control panel of the Z2 ship before takeoff. The people on the ship prepare for their imminent escape from the planet, and Han asks Mars what she should do. Everything she saw and heard on the red planet passes through her mind, and with sheer willpower she removes the blockage from the control panels. Suddenly an armed military officer appears in front of the ship intending to damage the engines with his weapon. Simon is about to go out to stop the madman, but Han beats him to it and points the gun at the American, but informs him that Mars will be the one to kill him. The military officer falls. The countdown for takeoff begins and Han realizes there's no time to return. She bids farewell to the crew, confessing her love for Simon. The ship takes off. Suddenly, Maya realizes it's dark at Mars' North Pole. This means they couldn't have been there just minutes ago. They were indeed at Mars' North Pole, but in a distant past when the red planet was still suitable for life. At the same time, Goldstein is informed of the ship's return and he is beside himself with rage, declaring that he will go to Mars himself. And this is where the first season ends. I hope you enjoyed this summary. If you liked it, I'd appreciate it if you shared your thoughts about the story. What was your favorite part? This science fiction narrative presents a fascinating blend of mystery and space exploration, offering a unique perspective on the origin of humanity. I'll soon bring more stories like this to share with you.